What happens when an African-American electrician without a uniform notices a malfunction in a system that even generals fear? His warning was ignored. What happened next was not included in any textbook for decades. You ever stand in a room and realize you're the only one who actually gives a damn if everybody walks out alive? That was me. Walter Brooks. June 1945, Los Alamos. I wasn't a physicist. I wasn't a captain or a colonel. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to speak unless someone handed me a wrench. I was an electrical tech, third-class, civilian contractor, which meant I was good enough to wire the heart of the deadliest weapon mankind ever dreamed up, but not good enough to talk when it was beating too fast. And one day, I did talk. Not loud, not dramatic. I just looked at the readings on the cooling relay and said, if you run this core at that temp, and humidity spikes the way it does out here at noon, you're not going to get a clean chain reaction. You're going to get a runaway burn. That's it. Just math. Just logic. They looked at me like I farted in church. Dr. Cranmore, white coat, Stanford patch on his shoulder, gave me the kind of look you reserve for a shoe scuff on polished tile. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, but we've had this verified by people who actually specialize in fission physics. And I said, with every ounce of patience I had left, that's great, sir, but your verification doesn't account for the fact that your backup coolant lines are 3 weeks behind schedule and your last silver cadmium rods were warped on delivery. The room went quiet. Not because I was wrong, but because I wasn't supposed to know. And that's when I learned something real important. In this war, truth had clearance levels. They didn't fire me. Not yet. That would have made it too obvious. They just moved me. Temporary reassignment to the logistics yard, which is military code for shut up and sort screws. I was out of the lab by sundown. The next morning, I'm in a tin roof shack in 110-degree heat, sorting electrical fuses with half-melted labels, while the real geniuses, the ones with badges and degrees, prepped their baby for its first cry. Every now and then, someone from the main compound would walk past the chain-link fence, sunglasses on, clipboards in hand, not even glancing our way. Out here, we were ghosts. Useful until we got too smart. That's when I met Javier. Big guy, Mexican-American, wore a welding glove on one hand, a bandage on the other. 40-something, tired like a man who's been fixing broken things since birth. He looked at me the way old guys look at broken toasters, like he wasn't surprised, just disappointed. You're the colored guy who told them their toy might blow up? I nodded. And you still breathing? Barely, he chuckled. Dry as dust. Then welcome to the club. We're the men who talk too much, know too much, and don't bow fast enough. We spent the next week unloading crates labeled Caution, Reactive Core Components. The labels were crooked. Some were upside down. On day 3, one fell off in my hand, and that's when I saw it. A box marked Category 4 Cold Shield Housing. But the manifest code? That thing belonged in high-yield core assemblies. Wrong label, wrong route, wrong everything. I felt the hairs rise on my neck. Javier, I said, you see this? He stared at the code, then back at the gate leading to the test site. You think they'll listen? I looked at my hands, burnt from soldering, calloused from a decade of being the last one off the line. I had built radios, generators, even patched up field radar in Normandy before being shipped back stateside. I wasn't just guessing. I knew what I saw. I'm not trying to start trouble, I said. I'm trying to keep them from turning New Mexico into a crater. So I did the unthinkable. Again, I wrote a report. Detailed, precise, no drama, just facts. And I walked it over to Engineering Command myself. They made me wait. Not in the office, not in a chair. Outside, in the sun, 2 hours. Then a young guy, barely 20, chewing gum like it owed him money, comes out and says, "Commander's busy." Says thanks for the input. That was it. No signature, no copy, nothing. That night I sat in the back of the mess tent, watching the project crew laugh over cheap bourbon and steak while the labor crew picked at beans and white bread. Cranmore was there. So was Major Evans, the guy who nearly fried half a unit in the Pacific because he couldn't tell a voltmeter from a volt. They were drinking to progress. I was drinking water from a chipped cup. Listening to them bet money on how fast Japan would fall once the prototype lit the sky. Nobody mentioned the lives. Nobody mentioned the kids who'd be sleeping when it hit. Nobody cared about the math, unless it fit the plan. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because I realized something worse than fear. These men weren't making a bomb to end the war. They were building a story, one where they got to be gods. And in their story, people like me, we were just the hands. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this story turns when the truth gets too dangerous to ignore. You know what's worse than being ignored? Being tolerated. They didn't punish me for that second report. Didn't strip my clearance. Didn't throw me off the site. No, that would have been too clean. They just started watching. I'd catch them. The clipboard men. Always with the clipboards. Pretending to log inventory, walking slow near my station, making notes that weren't about bolts or circuits. That kind of quiet pressure, the kind that crawls under your skin, makes you start second-guessing every move. Every wire I stripped, I wondered if someone was clocking how long it took. Every coffee break, I could feel eyes in the back of my neck. I wasn't dangerous. I was just inconvenient. That's what you become when you make too much sense in a room that already made up its mind. The turning point came on a Wednesday, sun-baked morning. Dry wind, full of grit. Javier was loading panel boards into a supply truck, muttering about how the labels were wrong. Again. I was checking serial numbers when a kid from engineering, fresh out of college, tie still too clean, comes running. Pale as chalk, sweat pouring down his face. Is this where they keep the rad shield backups? I looked at the manifest. Supposed to be? Why? They're asking for Unit 4 right now, but the serial isn't matching any of our entries. It might have been misrouted. Might have. I jogged back to the stack we logged on Monday, opened a crate we hadn't gotten to yet. And there it was, Unit 4, shipped to the wrong sector, tagged with the wrong identifier, and sitting out in the heat for 4 days. Unprotected. Now here's the thing. Radiation shielding isn't just a chunk of lead. It's precise, temperamental. You leave it baking long enough, you don't get shielding. You get amplification. And if they plugged that thing into a live core... I didn't think. I didn't ask permission. I grabbed the damn crate, threw it onto a dolly, and started pushing. Through the dust, across the compound, down toward Engineering Bay 3. The guard at the checkpoint stopped me. Authorization. It's labeled wrong, I snapped. They're about to fry the whole test block. He hesitated, looked at the clipboard. Wrong page. I need a work order. You want a fireball for breakfast? Move. He moved. When I rolled it into Bay 3, the room was already humming. Lights flashing, people in goggles flipping switches. And there, right in the center, a young tech lowering the housing onto the containment ring. "Stop!" Voices don't usually carry in those rooms, but mine did. Everything froze. That shield's been heat-swelled. 4 days in the open. You install that, you're turning the whole rig into a spark plug. Silence, then a voice from the corner. "Mr. Brooks, what are you doing here?" It was Cranmore, same blank face, same calm, professional tone that always meant trouble. "Saving your life. Again." He walked over, slow. The kind of slow that tells you the decision's already made, and you're not in it. You weren't cleared to be here. Neither was that unit, but you were about to bolt it into a live reactor. He stared, not at me, at the dolly, at the warped edges on the housing. He knew I was right, but Cranmore wasn't the kind of man to be wrong in front of a room. "Take Mr. Brooks out," he said. "Have him reassigned to grounds and sanitation." And that was that. Next morning I was pushing a mop. Not a tool, not a voltmeter, a mop. You ever mop a hallway where you built the circuits under the floor, where you know the wire bends better than the men walking over them? You ever hear young engineers joke about faulty grounding when you're the one who fixed it in secret 6 months ago? Yeah, I cleaned vomit off the floor outside the infirmary while they prepped the prototype. No name badge, no access, just another invisible man. Javier brought me coffee in a thermos. Didn't say much, just nodded. They thought they broke me. But let me tell you something. When a man's done being quiet, that's when he becomes dangerous. One night, late, I saw something. Storage hangar. Lights on when they shouldn't be. So I walked in. It wasn't sabotage, wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was sloppiness, half-sealed barrels, misfiled isotopes. A kid asleep at the security desk with a lit cigarette dangling from his lip. And at the far end of the room, an open case of fissionable materials with no record tag. I stared at it, and then I realized it wasn't the science that was the threat. It was the hands they put it in. Hands that didn't care. Hands that were too tired, too young, or too arrogant to double-check anything. I walked out of there with one thought burning in my head. If they're this careless now, what happens when they flip the final switch? But by then, nobody wanted to hear from me. The janitor. The man who got too involved. The man who panicked and caused disruption. They stripped my access. They even told the other workers I'd been emotional. Not wrong, not mistaken, emotional. That's the trick. They don't need to call you crazy. They just have to make you sound unreliable. But I still had one card left, and I was about to play it. This is the breaking point. Everything we've built up, all the warnings, all the cover-ups, it's about to explode. Stick around, because what happens next, it changed everything. If this story got you thinking, you're not alone. Sometimes one question can turn your whole view of a war upside down. What if they never built the bomb? Write in the comments. Do you believe that Japan would have surrendered on its own, or was it all much more complicated? It's important for us to hear your opinion. No arguments, just facts and honesty. And if you're interested in such deep, controversial topics, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories that are rarely talked about openly. They say a man has 2 choices: get out or get loud. I had already tried the first, mopping floors where I used to run cables. Watching the greenhorns, I trained push buttons they barely understood. And listening every damn day to them speak like they were saving the world. Maybe they were, but they were doing it blind, fast, and full of pride. And pride, I've learned, doesn't care who it burns, just who gets the credit. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Mid-July, night shift. The testing crew was working late, prepping the rig for something bigger. Word was floating around about final phase, authorization codes, site ready. I was outside the main office dumping trash. The window was open, and inside, Commander Cranmore, Dr. Kinley, a third man I didn't recognize, but the voice was sharp, clipped, East Coast accent, civilian, but with authority. They were going over logistics, not test theory, not safety, logistics. Where the drop would happen, how big the blast zone needed to be, casualty projections, evac distances. I stood frozen, one hand on the lid of a trash bin, listening, then the words that sealed it. If the war doesn't end, we'll drop the second one within 3 days. Target's not final yet. Second one. They already planned it. And that's when I realized it didn't matter how stable the bomb was. They were going to use it either way. You think the air gets thinner when you learn something like that? It doesn't. It gets heavier. Like the skies pushing down on you, daring you to breathe. The next morning, I showed up to work in my cleanest shirt. I still had my old tool belt, still had access to maintenance corridors most folks forgot existed, and I still had friends, men who remembered the first time I fixed their wiring in a blackout or caught a voltage spike before it melted the panel. Javier found me by the machine shed. "You're planning something," he said. Not a question. "I'm building something," I said. "You always are." I went to an old pump house on the south edge of the compound. Long abandoned, half the tools rusted. Rats had chewed through the insulation in the walls, but the wiring still ran under the floor. A leftover line from when the site was first wired up. I set up a relay switch, tied it to a backup generator, hooked in a voltmeter and a heat sensor from discarded lab equipment. It wasn't pretty, wasn't official, but it worked. A small signal line buried under the sand, running to a desk drawer in the mess hall. If the core overheated, if the levels spiked, if the ignition sequence kicked off early, the drawer would pop open. That was my alarm. "You think they'll listen?" Javier asked. "No," I said, "but I won't be the one who stayed silent." Day of the test. Camp was electric. Tension in every step, every conversation, even the mess line was quiet. No jokes, no chatter, just nerves and anticipation. People said it was history in the making, but to me, it felt like a funeral that hadn't started yet. I watched technicians haul out the final assembly crate, marked with stencils that looked more like tombstones than labels. Cranmore walked past, not seeing me. Didn't have to. He knew where I was, knew what I was. "Let him stay," he once told a junior officer. "It's better when men like that get to see how wrong they were." And that's what burned me most. Not the reassignment, not the mop, but the assumption that I'd doubt myself, and that I'd regret speaking up. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Night fell. The countdown began. From the top of the ridge I could see the tower. Tiny, thin, fragile-looking. They'd wired it up like a god on stilts. And down beneath it, buried in steel and concrete, sat the weapon I warned them about. I sat on the edge of the pump house, staring across the desert, wind dry in my mouth, hand on the old signal box, watching the heat needle rise, slowly, relentlessly. "You sure you want to be here for this?" Javier asked. "No," I said, "but I've been here for everything else. Why stop now?" He pulled up a chair. We said nothing for a long time. Just two men, not soldiers, not scientists, not heroes, just two pairs of eyes, watching the cost of ambition being wired into place. Then it happened. The drawer snapped open. A click, just loud enough to break the silence. I looked at the meter. The signal was peaking. I grabbed the radio. No military channel would listen to me. So I went to the civilian emergency band. "This is Walter Brooks, ID 782J, independent contractor, Los Alamos. Test rig is showing unstable rise in chamber 3. Overheating, sequence is active. Recommend delay." No answer. Again. "This is Walter Brooks. Reactor surge confirmed. Repeat. Confirmed. If you can hear me." The static cut. Nothing. That's when I knew. The bomb was already their victory. Whether it worked or not. Whether it burned too hot or not. Whether it scorched a city or jammed on the platform. It didn't matter. The world was going to see a flash, and the men behind it. They were going to smile for the cameras. Javier stood. "You tried. Not enough. Maybe not, but you didn't go quiet. That counts." And then the desert lit up, like day had punched through night's teeth. This isn't the end. What came after this moment, the fallout, the silence, the questions, it's what turned this from a warning into a reckoning. You'd think after a blast like that, the whole world would stop and ask, "Wait, was that supposed to happen?" But it didn't. The flash lit the desert for less than 5 seconds. The thunder rolled in like a train without brakes. And then, silence. Not from us, from them, the men in charge, the names on the doors, the ones who signed off on every piece of that bomb and still acted like it was all just theory. They didn't speak. Not in the days that followed, not about the heat spike, not about the signal, and definitely not about me. I was back to mopping floors the next day. Same shirt, same routine. Except now, I wasn't a man who spoke out. I was just another pair of hands that misread something. They didn't write me up. No memo, no investigation, nothing formal. They just moved on. And that's what hit hardest. Not that I was punished, but that I was erased. A week after the test, I walked past Engineering Bay 3, doors wide open, voices bouncing off concrete. Laughter, loud. They were celebrating. Some kid from D.C., in a fresh uniform, silver pin on his chest, held up a framed newspaper and grinned like he invented the sun. Front page headline, "The Bomb That Will End All Wars." There was no mention of who wired it, no mention of the warnings, no mention of anything that wasn't shiny, triumphant, and wrapped in ribbon. I went back to the storage bay and sat down next to the generator that used to power my signal line. Shut down now. Coils still warm. Javier found me there, sipping burnt coffee from a tin cup like it was church wine. "You were right," he said. "Doesn't seem to matter," I said. "That's because the truth doesn't get a parade." They called it a success. No one talked about the near-reactor failure. No one addressed the warped shielding that was still sitting in Crate 42 behind a wall of mislabeled barrels. No one brought up the fact that my signal triggered 90 seconds before detonation. They didn't deny it. They just acted like it never happened. And let me tell you something. Denial is easy to fight. Silence is not. That's when I realized this wasn't just a science project. It wasn't even a weapon. It was a narrative, a controlled story. And men like me, we didn't fit. Too many questions, not enough stars on the collar. 3 weeks later, I was summoned to the admin block. First time in months. Big room, air conditioning, cold water, fresh paint. 2 men waited inside. Neither smiled. One was military, stiff, gray-haired, ribbons that ran down his chest like stripes on a tiger. The other, civilian, black suit, government pin, real quiet type. They didn't offer me a seat. just stood. "Mr. Brooks," the military one said, "you've been a valuable contributor to the Manhattan Project." I said nothing. "It's come to our attention that you've raised concerns internally that could complicate the public understanding of recent operations." There it was. "We'd like you to sign a series of affidavits. Standard procedure, just to ensure confidentiality." I looked at the stack of papers on the desk. Typed, numbered, pages full of blanks already marked with my name. "You're asking me to lie. We're asking you to serve your country by preserving its integrity." They had it rehearsed. Slick, no threats, no raised voices. Just a velvet cage. "And if I don't?" The civilian finally spoke. Calm, measured. "Then we'll have to assume your time here has compromised your objectivity." I smiled. Funny. I thought it proved it. I signed what I had to. Not everything. Not all of it. Just enough to stay off their radar. But I didn't stop remembering. Didn't stop writing. I started keeping journals, details, timelines, names, numbers, equipment logs, signal data, internal memos. Everything I saw, everything they refused to see. And every night I'd sit on my cot and sketch diagrams in a spiral notebook, the one they never searched because they thought it was math. It wasn't math. It was memory. One night, late August, I ran into Dr. Kinley at the laundry station. He looked tired, skin pale, hands shaking. I didn't say anything at first, just folded my coveralls. Then he spoke. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "The surge, the heat spike. It shouldn't have happened. We were off by 6 degrees. I nodded. "But it still worked." He didn't answer. "Didn't it?" I asked again. Still nothing. He grabbed his laundry and walked off. That's when I knew. Some people didn't need punishment. They had to live with themselves. I left Los Alamos a month later. No ceremony, no handshake, no letter of thanks. Just a paper slip and a train ticket home. I kept the notebook, wrapped it in cloth, buried it under old parts in my garage. And every once in a while, when I heard someone on the radio talking about the great bomb that saved us all, I'd take it out, flip through the pages, and remember the men who didn't get saved, and the ones who never had a chance. You thought that was the ending? No. This is where the real battle begins. When one man leaves the war but carries the truth back home. People think when a war ends, man just comes home. But let me tell you something. Some of us never left it. The battlefield just got quieter. No sirens, no uniforms, just questions that nobody asked, and answers they didn't want to hear. I came back to Cleveland in the fall of 1945. Wasn't the homecoming they show in newsreels. No marching bands, no flag on the porch. Just the same factory smoke, the same cracked sidewalks, the same barber shop where they still charged colored folks 50 cents more. My mother said I looked tired. I didn't say why. My brother, the one who worked the docks, asked if I saw action overseas. I told him, no bullets, just wires. He laughed. Bet that's better. I didn't answer, because some wires don't just shock you. They change your whole view of what people are willing to build, and what they'll bury to protect it. I got work again at the plant. Same one I left in 42 when Uncle Sam told us we were needed elsewhere. Back then, they didn't want us in the science. They just needed hands. Steady, silent, obedient. Same deal now. Supervisor remembered me. Said I was sharp with circuits. But his tone had changed. Friendly, sure, but like I was some dog they weren't sure would bite. First few weeks were quiet. Wrench in hand, wire in my teeth, back under the belly of assembly lines. Same grind, different eyes. Then came the newspaper article. Page 4, small column. Veteran returns from Los Alamos. Didn't mention what I did, just where I'd been, and that was enough. By Tuesday, folks were whispering. By Friday, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Walter, you didn't, see anything you're not supposed to have seen, right?" I stared at him. I saw everything I was supposed to see. The real question is, did anyone else? He didn't like that. People never do when you make them stare past their comfort. At church the next Sunday, Deacon McCall introduced me as Brother Brooks, who served in the big Manhattan effort. Folks clapped, smiled. Old women gripped my hand and thanked me for protecting the boys. One man, though, Eugene Howard, pulled me aside after service. He was one of the smart ones, used to teach science at the colored school before they cut his funding and made him a janitor. "That bomb," he said, real quiet. "They say it ended the war, but I read about the radiation. That true?" I looked at him. "You ever hear a man scream when he isn't on fire, but his body thinks he is?" He swallowed. "I think maybe you should speak." So I did. Not with a microphone, not in the papers. Just little gatherings. Basement rooms, union halls, cafeterias after shift. I started talking. About what the bomb was made of, about what we were told, about what we saw, about the drawer that popped open before the sky did. And wouldn't you know, people listened. Because working men and women know when something smells wrong. They don't need a white coat or a clearance badge to trust their gut. And the more I spoke, the more folks started to wonder. If we could end the war without it, why didn't we? If he was right, why'd they shut him down? And if they'll silence a man like Walter, what else did they keep from us? That's when the pressure started. Small at first. A letter from my supervisor. Concerns about workplace morale. A knock at the door. Plainclothes man, no badge, asking if I'd been in contact with unauthorized reporters. Even got followed once, walking home. Black Buick. No plates. I stopped, turned, stared at the windshield until it pulled away. But the real blow came from my own people. One night I'm speaking at a union meetup. About 20 folks, all tired, all listening. And in walks Reverend James, eyes heavy, hands in his coat. Waits until I finish. Then he says, calm as a whisper, "Brother Walter, I respect your courage, but maybe now's the time to let go. For your safety, and for ours." That cut deeper than anything, because when your own start fearing your truth, you realize how much noise the silence must have made. I stopped speaking after that. Not because I changed my mind, but because the cost started falling on others. Javier wrote me a letter. Said he'd lost his job at a refinery after someone re-examined his war record. My cousin Annie got denied for a housing loan after she'd listed me as a reference. And the old factory cut my hours, cited budget concerns. So I did what I always do when the system closes its ears. I kept working, but I also kept writing, late at night, one hand on the pen, the other on the radio, listening to reports from overseas. Japan, Europe, nuclear research in new hands now. French, Russians, British. Everyone chasing the flash, no one asking about the drawer. And every once in a while I'd get a letter. No return address, no signature, just 1 or 2 lines. Saw the signal. You weren't wrong. Shield case mix-up confirmed in D.C. meeting. Keep talking. Some of us still here. That's when I realized something. They built a bomb. I built a trail. No cameras, no glory. But breadcrumbs. Small, scattered, and true. So that one day, when someone finally wanted answers, They wouldn't have to start from nothing, because silence is what power counts on, and noise, real noise, starts with just one man refusing to shut up. Thought this chapter was heavy? Wait until you see how far the silence reaches. Chapter 6 is where the truth finally hits a wall, and someone decides whether to go over it or through it. You know what's funny? I never wrote that notebook for anyone else. Not for the papers, not for historians, not for revenge. I wrote it because I was tired of hearing my own voice bounce off walls that didn't echo back. Sometimes you don't write to speak. Sometimes you write so the truth doesn't die with you. The notebook stayed hidden for years, wrapped in a cloth oil rag, tucked behind my toolbox in the garage, covered in receipts and dust and silence. Every so often I'd flip it open, check the pages, make sure the ink hadn't faded, that the diagrams still made sense, that the dates lined up. Then I'd shut it again, real slow, like closing the lid on something breathing, and I'd go back to life. Life was quiet by then. Older now, knees didn't like the cold, factory hours got cut. World moved on, rockets, satellites, color TV. Nobody talked about the bomb anymore. Not the first one. They had new bombs now, bigger, smarter, cleaner, they said, as if clean was a word that ever belonged in that conversation. Then one day, she showed up. College girl, maybe 22. Knocked on my front door with a clipboard in one hand and a pin that said Veterans Oral History Project. I opened the screen door, still wearing my stained work apron, hands full of wire clippings. "You, Walter Brooks?" "Sometimes," she smiled. "I'm doing interviews with veterans, scientists, factory workers, anyone who worked on the Manhattan Project. That whole thing's been wrapped up in ribbon for decades. That's the problem," she said. "Everyone tells the same story, same names, same quotes, same photo of the mushroom cloud. I want what's under that." I looked at her clipboard. Neat handwriting. Plastic recorder clipped to the top. Then I asked, "You sure you want what I've got?" She didn't blink. "That depends. You got something nobody else does." I walked inside, came back with the notebook, dropped it in her hands like a brick. She opened to the first page. Her face changed. We sat on my porch for 5 hours. I told her everything. Not the drama, not the fire and brimstone, just the steps, the warnings, the drawer, the silence, the meetings that never made the papers, the readings that didn't match the reports, the men who left the project with more ghosts than medals. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't tape the whole thing either, said it didn't feel right. That was the first time in years someone looked at me and saw the full weight. A week later, she came back, this time with someone else. Older man, suit, said he was a journalist. "Independent," he clarified. Like that was a shield. They asked if I'd let them copy the notebook, archive it, maybe publish, and I told them I didn't keep it so someone could rewrite it in cleaner sentences. "Then why keep it at all?" he asked. "So the next man who gets told to shut up won't feel alone." I gave them a copy, not the original. That stayed with me. Things moved fast after that. The girl, her name was Carla, sent it to some institute. They called it the most complete first-hand counter-narrative to Los Alamos operations. Fancy words for this guy wasn't lying. Then came the letters. Some kind, some not. A few veterans reached out. Quiet, careful, thanked me. One said, "I always wondered why the core readings jumped. Now I know it wasn't just me." Another sent a clipping. Declassified memo from 1945. Confirmed the shielding swap. Confirmed the suppression. They knew. They always knew. Then one morning the phone rang. Public radio. Asked if I'd do an interview. Not live. Not flashy. Just audio. Just my voice. I thought about it, and I said yes. That's how it happened. I sat in a small studio with a microphone that smelled like dust and coffee. Told my story, not like a confession, like a mechanic showing a blueprint. Told them about the drawer, the signal, the silence, about building something the world would use, then walking away from it because I still wanted to live with myself. The interview aired on a Sunday, wasn't front-page news, wasn't on every channel, but the phone rang more after that. Neighbors dropped by with old memories. One man, retired professor, said his students used the story in a paper on ethics in engineering. Another told me her father had worked in logistics and always suspected something went sideways at the final test. One day, a letter arrived, handwritten, careful, no name, just 3 sentences. We were there. We saw it. You were never wrong. Thank you for not letting them bury it. And that's when I realized something. I didn't fight a war with a rifle. I fought it with a notebook. With a drawer that popped open 30 seconds before the sky did. With a voice that refused to stay quiet. And even if most of the world still preferred the clean version, there were just enough people listening to keep the real one alive, because they may have built the bomb. But I made sure someone remembered the heat. That's the end of Walter Brooks's story, at least the part we're allowed to tell. Want to hear more stories no one put in textbooks? Subscribe, because truth doesn't need clearance. And drop a comment, because someone out there is still watching the drawer.